Okay, we'll start the meeting then. Thank you. All right, Council, I'd like to call this regular Council meeting of September 6, 2022 to order with adoption of the agenda. Someone make that motion. Councillor Chalette, second by Councillor Palmer. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Adoption of the minutes of the regular Council meeting of August 23rd. Councillor Chalette, Councillor Palmer, all in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Any business arising from the August 23rd meeting? Councillor Elliott.
Yes, sorry, Your Worship. Just regarding the Lower Arrow Heights issue, but the project that's proposed for that area. I've received a number of comments on the feasibility of it and the nature of the actual survey that went around, and I'm just wondering, maybe some clarity or where we're at with that would help me understand what's going on. I wonder if you can give me an update, or anyone can.
Mr. Parliament, I don't see Mr. Black on here. Any comments regarding that's on the sewer extension? Is that what you're asking about, Councillor?
Yeah. There's just been some commentary that I've received from several different people about the nature of the original survey, when it was completed, and whether it was for approval of the project or just exploring the feasibility of it. And there's just some different dialogue that I haven't nailed down on what's actual factual and what's just conjecture. So I'm just trying to understand what the nature of the project is, how accurate it may unfold, and whether it's feasible. A couple of people commented the feasibility of the endeavor is in question as well. So.
Okay, so Ms. Floyd, do you have any documentation regarding that original proposal or request from the community, and then anything from Mr. Black?
I just tried to contact Mr. Black. I'm not sure where he is, but from what I understand is we received a petition from a number of residents, and basically that petition triggered the next step. So right now we're not moving forward with it without all of the property owners that are involved signing a specific petition that advises them the cost per parcel.
Okay. Yeah, so there's no open house that will be forthcoming, or it's just right now we're just trying to decide on whether the petition was accurate or valid, or what's actually going to unfold?
No, so we would need another petition where every single property owner in that local area service signed, and it has to be 50% of the properties and 50% of the evaluated cost of each home, like the assessment cost.
So there's no commitment at this stage. We haven't sunk anything into it.
No.
Yeah, and I guess just the engineering part of it all. I mean, that's in Steve's world, but the full expenses that are associated with connecting to that sewer line are going to be significant. I've heard the line there is pretty deep, and might require a pump station and a whole bunch of things that are not laid out at this stage.
Pump station is already in place for the other development, so that's there. So it's a matter of laying the line, connecting up to the houses, but I'm not going to speak for Mr. Black at this point. Mr. Black's just coming on now, so we'll ask him, Councillor Elliott, and then go from there. So Mr. Black, Councillor Elliott's just inquiring about the local service regarding Lower Arrow Heights sewer connection and the petition from the residents. Just wondering about costs and where we're at. So any comment?
Thank you, Worship, and thank you for the summary, and my apologies for being a few moments late. We will be engaging a consulting firm to undertake the first step of this process, which is to reach out to each of the residents in the area that has been proposed for the new sewer, and they will have an opportunity to vote on that. I have not yet established a budget. My expected budget for this project is in the neighborhood of, or not to exceed $5,000 for this effort. And that will include all the mail out and the paperwork that goes with it, including the engineering and the estimated costs for the frontages and connections.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that sounds reasonable, Steve, but the questions that I've received from several different people just say they didn't know when the original survey was done, or they didn't participate in it, and there's been a lot of development since then. Well, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago that they suggested it, that it was put out. There's been so much happened since then that they didn't know whether it was still valid. I mean, a lot of people put in their own septic systems already, and with the new growth, does that plan still make sense? So that was what was questioned.
Thank you, and through your worship to Councillor Elliott. The petition came very shortly after the Newlands Phase 1 subdivision went into construction. So that would have been completed last year. And so design works would have started the year before. And as part of that project, and in order to keep or maximize the lot coverage and the amount of lots in the Newlands subdivision, which is, I believe it's 20 meters without sewer service, and it's 15-meter frontage with sewer service, that the developer, Jack McKinnon, decided to install this lift station for that project.
Mm-hmm.
As part of that process, and so that would have been probably the first year I arrived in Revelstoke, so 2020. And as part of that process, we required the developer to make sure that the inverts to the sewage wet well were low enough to service all of Lower Arrow Heights. The size of the system is very small, and so it's basically the smallest lift station that we can acquire. And so it's a minimal cost, it's already in place. And we made sure that the invert was low enough so that we can use gravity to drain all of that sewage from basically Lee Road and potentially across Lee Airport, and all of the area that is not serviced by sewer at this point, which is basically from 100 meters down Nickel from Airport to the west, and everything to the north on Airport. And so that will then make sure that we can have everything except the hospital, and basically the Newlands subdivision can be serviced now by the sewer system, if the community is in support.
Mm-hmm. So the petition that was done in a year or so ago, was that done through the city, or was that just an informal one that was circulated?
That was actually a citizen-led petition, and former Mayor McKee was one of those people that initiated the process, and there was one other woman, Sonia, who I believe is a driver for the school district, who went around the neighborhoods and submitted those petitions and those names to the city staff so that we could initiate this process.
And do you know whether the question was, would you be interested, or are you in favor of it? I mean, because there's a difference. There's a subtle difference.
There is a subtle difference there, and because it's a petition and it is driven by a process that's legislated, 50% plus one of the people in the district must vote for it, and two, 51% of the value of all the properties must also be in support. And so it's just not one item that will trigger a creation of this district. It's those two items that need to be successful in order for the process and project to move forward.
Mm-hmm. And who would critique the petition? Because you know, if they say they have 50%, but if 20% of the residents weren't there or weren't participatory, you have to review. You have to ask the questions.
So again, I would and hypothetically, if 20% of the people were not participating in the process, I think it would be very difficult for us to achieve the second of those goals, which is the 50% of the property value in support.
Yeah.
And so, and then if we get the 51%, even with 20% missing, then, you know, that is one positive outlook on this. The formal process will be led by a consulting team and certified by our financial department. And so this will not be something that, as much as I would like to be in charge, this is one that will be formal for the community, and there will be no questions as to whether or not it's formal and valid.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting to. I just, you know, I'm sure there are some people who are interested. I would love to get it. You know, they're at a stage in their use on their septic field, or it's convenient for them. But if the majority of the neighborhood are not, you know, are not fully aware of all the expenses involved, then their acceptance or willingness to participate may be very different.
Absolutely, absolutely, and because of that, that's why we must go through this formal process. And, you know, we did get the community-led petition, but now it's formal, and so this is the legal commitment to having this invoicing on your tax bills for the next 10 years or something of that nature.
Perfect. Thank you. That's what I was trying to get to.
You're very welcome, and my apologies for being late.
Any other business arising from the minutes of August 23rd? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to announcements from the mayor. So just for the public's benefit, nomination papers, packages are available now and need to be returned by 4 p.m. on Friday. Still available, so if you want to run for council, now's the time. Pick up your package, and we'd love to see you run. Also want to make mention that our Airport Way multi-use path is under construction and looking forward to seeing completion. Lots of good comments from those in the neighborhood regarding safety. They're happy to see that coming to fruition. So awesome to see that, Mr. Black, so thank you for that. All right, we are moving on to delegations. MicroHome Initiatives, Mr. Adrian Jock is here in council chambers. Adrian, come on forward. You're going to give us a presentation, and I'm told you're going to be under 10 minutes.
That's right. Can I expect the presentation to come up here?
So Ms. Floyd, do you have the presentation for the screen?
I do. I'm just going to share my screen here.
Yep.
Can you see it now?
Yes, thank you. Go ahead, Adrian.
Okay, good afternoon, Your Worship, Council. It's an absolute pleasure of mine and a privilege to be standing in front of you here today to present to you a passion project of mine, which I hope will address affordable housing in our community. When I came to Revelstoke 4 years ago, at the time you guys were elected, I came here in my camper van out of a one-year travel trip around Canada and the United States to study eco-villages, permaculture, and really anyone who's learning how to live affordably and sustainably. When I came here, I fell in love with this community and wanted to live here immediately, but realized very quickly that trying to find a house in November is nearly impossible. So I spent a year looking for an apartment to rent, and I was very fortunate to find one and have called Revelstoke home ever since. In that time, I lived in a house with 11 people during the height of COVID, which was interesting, and then was very fortunate to purchase a home in Johnson Heights. I bought that home for $339,000, and today that house is now worth $550,000. So we can see very clearly how the impact of affordability in our community is happening all around us. So when I decided to get involved in this project, I reached out to the community to ask if this sort of concept of living in community and in collaboration on land together would be of interest. And within a survey that I wrote, I had about 300 respondents in 4 days. And I saw quite rapidly the interest that was in this development. And there was really this untapped potential to really harness the community to develop affordable housing. From that, I decided to move forward and establish the MicroHome Initiative. And really the idea is that, the greatest loss to our community are those who can no longer afford to live here. And how can we keep that talent from leaving our community? The purpose of this project is to provide attainable home ownership, which I think is a market on the spectrum that is really unattainable throughout Canada, but especially here in our community. And then the legacy we hope to create with this is that if we're able to create affordable housing for home ownership, we can establish a perpetual affordability model that ensures that home is affordable for decades, and also ensures that that talent and those people that choose to live here in Revelstoke can continue to do so and build that capacity for the community. Next slide, please. So I started looking at, available properties in Revelstoke and the downtown core, and looking at, the various sizes, and if we could find even a small lot to a large lot, what could be done. So as a case study, I looked at the Mountain View Elementary School property site, similar to the Begbie View Elementary School that BC Housing purchased, as well as the other property in Big Eddy. Next slide, please. So if we were to subdivide a lot like that into the neighborhood character that surrounds it of single family residential properties, we would look at about roughly 16 lots on 1.7 acres. What I'm proposing is about 6 lots to have 8 homes with a plethora of other community amenities and gardens that would be included on that property. Next slide, please. And so this is our community kind of concept layout. And it takes a few inspirations from co-housing, eco-villages, and pocket community developments. And I think the first and foremost that makes this property stand out is that cars are on the outside of the development. This ensures that we are prioritizing people over the vehicle, and we're creating these opportunities for residents to connect with their neighbors. There's also no fences, which oftentimes tells you what's yours and what's theirs, but instead we share together. In the middle of the property would be a common community building, a flexible space for the residents to decide whether or not they want to use it as a co-working space, maybe a meeting space, maybe for therapy, or an income generator for the development as a whole. Surrounding that space would be parkland, maybe a playground and fire pit, shade trees, and green space. And so they all kind of look in onto that space. Surrounding each home, to really maximize the amount of landscaping we can provide on this property, we have these bioswales that would ensure that residents can grow food, they can capture rainwater, they can compost, and they provide beautification and privacy screening between the homes. On the outside of the development, we would utilize vertical growing structures, maybe fruit orchards, and have also used the landscaping of paving stones coming off of the sidewalk to encourage residents of Revelstoke to engage with the property, maybe pick an apple on the way to work. Next slide, please. And so this idea of shared land ensures that we as a whole, as a community, can afford more by sharing things together. So we don't need to own our own snow blowers, we don't need to own our own lawnmowers, that a community of this size can own one of those things and share them among your neighbors. It also ensures that by developing it as a bare land strata, we can, a homeowner can establish a mortgage, an insurance, and a freehold title, which allows them to develop a relationship with the bank, build equity, and move themselves into the middle class, which I think is missing in our economy today. Next slide, please. This idea of agriculture, I think, is a cornerstone of this development, and what I believe should be a focus on all new development into the future, which is this concept of being able to create intergenerational relationships between seniors and kids. Also provides food security. As you all know, that Revelstoke runs out of food in a few days if we have disruptions to our supply chain. We also have a variety of other areas to grow on the property. Next slide, please. These amenity buildings could be used for co-working spaces, maybe a daycare, shared tool library, and really anything that the community that lives in that neighborhood decides how they want to use that space. Next slide, please. And then these would be the 8 small homes, uniquely designed for the characteristics of Revelstoke, but also provides 2-bedroom units at roughly 700 square feet, all included. Has a closed-in porch, 2 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, and a private backyard patio We believe that this addresses the single parent family, the first-time home buyer, and seniors. And this is an idea of, instead of creating housing, affordable housing for one demographic, we create it for a variety of demographics to ensure that we are developing a cohesive community. Next slide, please. I think this is the cornerstone of the development, which ensures that this project is a legacy project that could be replicated, but also ensure its perpetual affordability throughout the decades. So what we want to try to avoid is this red line that you can see here is pretty much an 18.5% increase that we're seeing every year in Revelstoke's speculative market. What we want to achieve is somewhere between the 3.8%, that blue line, and the 1.9% increase that's roughly between the average inflation per year. And so that would increase the property value at a steady rate that ensures that the property itself is relative to the money you've invested into it, and that we're creating this stepping stone into the market, which isn't available. What we're seeing here on the right-hand side is the cost of housing over these years. And I think the most significant increase is the time when you guys started council to today. We're seeing roughly a 100% increase in 5 years. And today now an average house is $751,000, according to the Housing Action Plan. Next slide, please. So this is our development cost estimate. It's very rough. I think it can be criticized quite intensely, but I think what we're trying to establish here is a goal. And so if we were to achieve land costs at $700,000 for 0.7 of an acre, small homes at roughly $1 million for 8 of them, the amenities, landscaping, and utilities at $500,000, we can expect that this development could cost around $2 million. Between the 8 homes, we're looking at just over $250,000. That, I believe, is a price point that a lot of Revelstokians can afford. With a monthly mortgage payment of $1,100 for a 2-bedroom unit, this ensures quite affordability for all income ranges. But if you look at what it requires to purchase the home, at 20% down payment of $53,000, you'd require an income of $58,000. At 5% down as a first-time home buyer, you can expect to pay $13,000 as a down payment with a required income of $68,000. So at this measure of affordability, we are hitting a target audience of the low to moderate income, the lone parent families, and the non-consensus families, seniors, singles, and partnerships. But I believe that we can make this house even more affordable through the allocation of land from the city of Revelstoke, through partnerships with other community partners. We can continue to decrease the cost of this construction, which ensures that that home could even be affordable for decades longer. What we're seeing here in the top right-hand corner is that at an average of 18 available properties for 0.42 of an acre, we're looking at $623,000. And so this is significantly increasing the cost of construction in our community and makes affordable housing development near impossible to provide our community. We're looking at $751,000 for this average price of a home. That means that you need a household income of $188,000, which means 85% of our community can't afford a home. It also means that the 15% of them that can, they already do own a home. So this is a big issue, and I'm sure you're aware of, but this is something that I hope that we can find a solution to. Next slide, please. This is another concept I created. At 0.45 of an acre, we have 3 2-bedroom homes, 2 1-bedroom homes, with a lot of the same concept ideas of shared space, community gardens, and open connective space. Next slide, please. And so where we are now is the Revelstoke Community Housing Society has adopted this initiative. We have letters of support from various organizations, as well as the MP Rob Morrison of the Conservative Party of our regional district, who has agreed to help us find federal and provincial funding for this project if the city of Revelstoke partners. As well, the next steps would be to acquire this funding from the federal governments, engage with the community at wide to get additional in-kind support, and then develop a legacy that provides affordable housing for our community. And that's my presentation at 11 minutes, sorry.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you.
So any questions from council? So I have a couple of questions. So basically, to make this project work, it's city donated land would need to be allocated to keep those prices down. Is that correct?
There is a model where we can afford the project by purchasing the land ourselves. But as you can appreciate, as a nonprofit organization, it's a significant amount of risk. As well as when we receive an in-kind donation from the city of Revelstoke for land, it engages the municipality, all of the residents, engages the province and the federal government to also participate. According to my research, there's no funding available for home ownership developments. And that to me seems like a huge missed opportunity. And that's where I think the city of Revelstoke, in partnership with this project, can help to advocate for that allocation of funding.
Okay, good. Councillor Brooks.
Just further to that, a lot of the BC housing, and I'm pretty sure it's the same with CMHC. If they're looking to fund a project in a municipality, they want to see that the municipality supports it, and generally having land donated or being offered in some fashion is the support they want to see. So basically, it's very difficult to get funding for a project without land. Basically, they want to see land, and there's very little funding available to buy land, if any. I'm not sure if there. I know a few years ago there wasn't any. Maybe there's a program now, but.
Okay, I'll appreciate that. Any other comments from council? So at this point, Adrian, thank you for the presentation. Councillor Elliott, you have your hand up. I see you waving there from down.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks, Gary. Adrian, just a general thought. I mean, what is the support for actually just doing this thing, buying some land and getting it off the ground as a group? It's nothing new. Trailer parks and this type of. I mean, this is a smaller tiny home version of a trailer park, but it's a more collaborative, community endeavor. But getting a group of people together and buying a chunk of land and building this thing as a community project, has that been approached? Have we even tried that? Why does it have to be granted money? I mean, is it viable? Is this still affordable without the land being granted?
Through your worship to Councillor Elliott, certainly this could be an approach to take. But as you purchase land and you purchase the construction of housing and you purchase, it continues to increase the cost of construction. You can see here that the market has not been able to achieve affordable housing. It's not in their interest to do so. There's no money in it. And so if this is a project that we were to take on by purchasing land and through like a co-housing model, it's certainly been done. But I think what's unique here is that what we're trying to do is provide a case study so that Revelstoke could be a leader and an innovator for affordable housing, and we can then replicate that idea for other municipalities throughout the province.
Great. All right. Any other comments, questions? Okay.
Yeah. Just to further that, to the question of, why doesn't the private sector do this? If I look at this correctly, Adrian, when you talk about on page 11 on your development cost estimate, if you or the housing authority were to do this with no stakeholder contributions from either BC Housing, CMHC, City of Revelstoke, you'd be looking at a $2 million budget to acquire land, to build these units and hopefully sell them at $266,000 a piece. And of course, you don't have the capacity to do that. I think what you're asking is, to Councillor Brooks Hill, is if we were to leverage some BC Housing costs, they provide capital funding. They also provide operating funding by way of a 60-year mortgage. If you could leverage with CMHC, if you could leverage other affordable housing entities like a Habitat for Humanity, etc., and the City of Revelstoke, then you're able to bring those costs down. And we would be able to possibly recoup some of those land costs if the city were to donate land, because if you enter into an operating mortgage with BC Housing spread over 60 years, and this is way after any of us are going to be here, those land costs can be refunded back to the city by way of a mortgage through BC Housing. I've seen it. There's a similar project being done in the Shuswap. So I think what you're asking, just to clarify, Adrian, is there an appetite for the city to partner with other partners to see if we can bring these per unit costs even down further? Because if you take the 700,000 off and it was donated land, then you're down to a $1.4 million project, and you drop your per unit costs from 266 to 200. Is that something the city would be interested in, so we can get these units built? Pretty tough to do it from a nonprofit point of view with no help. That's what I'm hearing. So I think it's got some merit. Staff are definitely going to look into it, because I think the only answer is a collaborative effort. We got to get very creative when it comes to affordable housing.
Yes.
Anyways, more of a comment, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Parliament. Thank you, Adrian. Appreciate your perspective and your presentation. And go ahead, Councillor Elliott.
Gary, again, what about, instead of donating land, backing a loan? I mean, as this group, you can say you get 10 people interested in the line, purchasing some land, the city could sort of back it as a security or a creditor, like a parent, and support it that way. I mean, that's an option as well. I mean, there are loads of finding ways to support something if the city's in agreement with it. But further to that, is the city in agreement with it? Can you do this in the existing zoning?
And so at this point, I think that's a good question, Councillor Elliott. I think we can put this back to staff to kind of have a look at this and see if there's an alternative, if there's a way that we can assist and take it from there.
Sure. Well, I mean, maybe that's a question for the planning staff right now. Is this viable in any zone that we have in place?
Yeah. So to answer that, Councillor Elliott, if we were able to find land properly zoned and the setbacks work and there was an appetite to pursue it, most likely what we'd be looking at with our partnership with BC Housing is that they fund so much a door. So BC Housing, based on an RFP process, will fund so much a door, anywhere from 100 to 150,000 per door for the actual cost to produce that unit. And then you enter into, through a non-for-profit society or housing authority or whatever, you enter into a 60-year mortgage, and in that mortgage are the land costs, which are amortized over 60 years, and the housing authority pays back the municipality for the land that was donated at the time of the ribbon cutting. So there's different models we could look at, subject to zoning, but there's two funding streams with BC Housing. There's the capital and the operating, and in the operating, you can blend the land costs over time, where the tenants each month pay toward the land costs, and the city recoups those costs as per the contract you would sign with the builder or a stakeholder.
What if you just ignored all the handouts and contributions, saying, okay, this is a private endeavor. We get 8 people together. We're going to build 8 tiny homes on a lot. They buy the land, and city support co-signs the loan for the land for the entire price. So it's no handout, nothing like that, but they have a secure funding source in the government. That's, I guess it relates to how sustainable do we want to make it? How affordable do you want to make it? Do you want to give it as a gift, or do you want to actually make it reasonable? $250,000 for a 2-bedroom place doesn't sound unreasonable.
And quickly, the city could lease the land, and we could offer a loan to be paid back over that 60-year operating line with BC Housing, but we would not gift it, we would just lease it. The challenge, unfortunately, whoever buys that unit is buying a unit on leased lands, similar to what you do with First Nations lands, and not fee simple. I think the goal here that Adrian suggested is a strata, but it's home ownership with land. But yes, the city could lease the land and have those costs recuperated over time as well. That's another model to look at.
Yeah, I think there's many different ways to do it, but I think that the essential right now is you get the core group. Say you had 10 people lined up and say they're ready to go. What can we do to support it, and start taking barriers away, or finding a way to lend support if it's there.
Good. All right. Thanks, Councillor. Appreciate your comments. We'll leave it with Mr. Parliament and staff to have a look at it and see what our alternatives are. Thank you. Any other comments from council? Saying none, thank you, Adrian.
Thank you.
Appreciate your presentation.
Appreciate you.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.
Adrian.
All right, let's move on to item 9A, road closure bylaw. Someone want to put that, Council Palmer?
That road closure bylaw number 2339 be adopted.
Seconder for the motion, please, Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on the motion? This is that small piece of land on Newlands Road, just to kind of make it all align. So, seeing no other comments, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 9B. Someone want to put that on the table for me, MRDT? Councillor Charlotte.
That municipal and district tax levy amendment bylaw number 2343 be adopted.
Seconder for the motion, Councillor Palmer. Any discussion on this motion? That is bringing up the MRDT to 3%. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Item 9C, property tax exemption bylaw. Councillor Charlotte.
That the 2023 property tax exemption bylaw number 2344 be read a first, second, and third time.
Seconder for that motion, Councillor Brooks Hill. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 10, and this is a notice of motion regarding strategic planning session. Councillor Palmer, do you want to put the motion on the table?
Yes, please. That staff retain a facilitator to assist council in the strategic planning session focused on tangible outcomes for the council 2022 to 2026 term, and that this session be scheduled as early as possible, ideally in early November 2022.
Second for the motion, Councillor Charlotte. Discussion on the motion. You want to speak to it, Councillor?
Yeah, so I'm just anxious to have whoever's the new council is, whether I'm there or not, that we get going on planning for what the accomplishments for the new council will be for that next term. And there is a competitive field for getting good facilitators out there, so it has to be jumping ahead of the game on that. So that's the intent behind the motion.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. Councillor Brooks.
I agree with Councillor Palmer. The one caveat being, depending on who forms the next council, if there's a bunch of new people, having a strategic plan with tangible outcomes can be challenging when people don't necessarily understand what's possible and what's not. So I'm not sure that having it in early November would be useful, or perhaps less useful than, say, early December, or
Councillor Palmer?
Yeah, so thanks, Councillor Brooks Hill. Fair points. So what typically happens is we have a new council, especially if it's a new council, then there's this long, painful training process, learning curve, and very quickly we lose the picture of where we actually, the big high level things where the council wants to go. And in my opinion, that the new council should be sitting down and saying, where do we want to go over the next 4 years? We'll have staff and the facilitator that will be giving reality checks. Hopefully there's some incumbents here that will also be giving some reality checks as far as what, what's really achievable. However, if we don't do that, the new council, especially if it's largely a new council, that you'll go 6 months before you're even thinking about it, and then next thing you know, the time's going by, and those big things aren't even achievable in that term. So that's why I think it's really, really important. For sure, there's that learning curve. There's no question about it, but it helps the staff then to be able to have a clear focus of where that council collectively wants to go. And sorry for going on, but the other thing is, that strategic planning session will be the time that individual councillors that think they're going to fix the world, individual councillors are going to realize they need to play with 6 other colleagues at the table. So that's a really good, that's probably one of the most important things for council to learn right early on is you can't make changes by yourself.
Appreciate that comment. Councillor Schmidt.
Thank you, Your Worship. And further to that, I agree. I think one of the most influential experiences I had when I was on the Chamber of Commerce was our strategic planning session. And going into it before having had governance training and before really understanding what the Chamber's role was, to be able to voice where we wanted to go, regardless of whether it was possible or not, was a useful exercise. And the facilitator was very well versed in what was and was not possible, what was and was not our job. And to learn the beginnings of that from a strategic standpoint, not just this ethereal, these are all the things you could do, but starting with what you want to do was a much more useful way to get into the training and to learn what the job really could be. So I fully support, I think the sooner the better. I think tangible outcomes is vague enough to make it reasonable, that it might not be specific projects, but it will be something tangible and measurable that the council can hopefully agree on, that what is going to be measurable, what is going to be tangible for them. And I think it's important to be, like you said, to have that conversation as early as possible, to find those shared common values and to really get on board with championing something going into that first budget cycle. And then more of the learning will come. I mean, it takes that full year to really get your head wrapped around what the job can be.
Okay.
I think would set it
All right. Any other comments from council? Councillor Elliott?
I think the next council will be in a much better position than we were when we started with the OCP as a guiding sort of reference point or a reference document in place. That was missing when we started, or it needed to be refreshed significantly. And I think a lot of the strategy should come from reviewing the OCP. So I think that might be a step before once the council comes into play, just review your OCP and then say, what can we actually make changes? What changes can we make immediately and put in place in an effective manner? So I think that should be the first step. Maybe review the OCP as a group and say, what can we implement right away? What can we do to make that OCP become valid?
Great. I appreciate all the comments. I think the premise behind all of this is to get things off to a good start. And having a facilitator, as Councillor Palmer has mentioned, that is well versed in this is going to be the key to making this work for all of the new council. So definitely I'm supportive. Councillor Brookshire, you have another comment.
I just wanted to say I've been convinced by my fellow councillors I'll support this.
All right, I will now call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 11A, staff reports. Someone want to put this on the table for me, please? Councillor Charlotte.
That the Valley Trail Multi-Use Pathway Project be awarded to Jake J Construction Limited in the amount of $729,752.50, excluding applicable taxes.
Seconder for that motion, please. Councillor Palmer. Discussion on the motion. Mr. Black, do you have comment that you would like to make?
Thank you, Your Worship. I have an extremely short presentation, if I may indulge you.
Yes, please. We see it.
Can you see it?
We can.
Perfect. Valley Trail, multi-use path. Park Drive to the new roundabout. It's a 3-meter wide multi-use path. Park Drive to the new Nickel Road, Camosi realignment roundabout. Includes crosswalks, driveways, updated drainage solutions. And so without pipe, we'll be putting water into the ground. Updated lighting to meet our safety requirements. This is part of a bigger plan that is linking the resort to the city. Connectivity, active transportation. This is what where the project location is. It's the dark portion on the south side of Nickel. You can see it goes from the grade school And the developer, Mackenzie Village, will also be building a sidewalk on the north side of the project, hopefully this fall. Project price. This is a funded project by the Community and Economic Recovery Program. So total grant program, $950,000 roughly. You saw the budget of $700,000 roughly for this project. That includes engineering fees up to date of around $70,000. And lastly, it gives us about $100,000 in contingency funding for this project. This is part of phase one of the trail that will go from Park all the way up to the resort. The resort will be building the remainder of that. And so fun project. The grant does require us to be finished sometime early next year. And so it's important that should council approve this, that we break ground immediately and get us going.
Thank you, Mr. Black. Any comments from council? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Online? Motion's carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Black, appreciate that. Moving on to 11B, grant and aid requests. Someone want to put that on the table? Councillor Schlett.
That the following grant and aid requests or applications be approved.
Seconder for the motion, Councillor Palmer. Any discussion on the motion? We see two there. So in the Finance Committee, and Councillor Schlett and I went over it, Indigenous Friendship Society, for free rental of facility and community connections for adult bus tickets seem both appropriate, and we have the funding for that. Any comment, Ms. McCabe?
No, Your Worship, it's all in the report.
All right, thank you. Any comment from council? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 11C, Luna Legacy Project. Someone want to put that motion on the table for us, please? Councillor Schlett.
That the request from Victoria or V. Strange and M. Manley to modify the placement of the Isabel Corsier statue from the pad inside the planter box to the existing concrete pad at ground level next to the bench be approved.
Seconder for that motion. Councillor Brooks Hill. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Schlett, you want to make comment? Do you sit on that committee?
I do sit on that committee. It was discussed at the committee. We'd kind of hem and hawed back and forth, and it sounds like the artists and the proponents have come back with this recommendation instead. Thankfully, in the report, you can see a better job of illustrating what the statue will likely look like in the actual space. I'm excited to see it unveiled this fall.
Yeah, I'm excited as well, and actually think it's most appropriate to see it at ground level. People like to touch these things and be part of it. Great in that trendy thing nowadays to have a selfie with a statue, but also they're touching living history. So I'm definitely supportive of this. Any other comments from council? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to art galleries. Someone want to put that on the table? Councillor Schlett.
That the request to relocate Ski Dial from 200 Mackenzie Avenue, the CIBC building, to 111 First Street West, Explorer Society, be approved.
Seconder for that motion, Councillor Palmer. Any discussion on that motion? I'm just saying that it's at the request of CIBC because it has sharp edges to, they're concerned about liability, so moving it seems to be the appropriate thing to do. Mr. Nato, any comments?
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't think so. We have run this through the Public Art Committee for their consideration as well via email, and we'll be having further discussion on it next week on Monday, but everyone seems supportive of the move.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from council? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item E, Luna Fest. Councillor Schlett.
That the special event permit for Luna Fest 2022 be issued.
Seconder for the motion. Councillor Elliott. Any discussion on the motion? I think that every year that we have Luna, it's bigger and better, and it's one of those events that keeps bringing people back to our community for art. And I absolutely think it's an incredible event, so I'm definitely supportive of this. Seeing no other comments, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to correspondence, we have a letter from Revelstoke Community Housing Society, request for provision at city land in principle, dated September 1st. I've read through this letter and think that at this point in time, it would be good for us to discuss with staff as to what we plan to do with some of our land, and then come back and address this. Any comments, Mr. Parliament?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So having read the letter and understanding that Revelstoke, like most communities in Canada, are undergoing a housing crisis, really what the letter is asking is that we, the city, enter into a partnership, a non-binding partnership for now. It's almost like a letter of intent where you want to negotiate the terms of a possible either gifting of land or leasing of land, or as Councillor Elliott mentioned, a possible loan, a share, etc. A letter of intent is not intended to be binding by either party, but it shows good faith that the city sees the merit of such a project, and there's lots of questions to be asked. So when I read through this, I think that's what I would suggest, whether you call it a letter of principle, but I call it a letter of intent to enter into a partnership. It's non-binding. Let's look at what we have in terms of surplus lands, no different than what we're trying to do, trying to find a home for the pump track. We're trying to find some lands that we could gift to the users that want to build a pump track. I don't think this is really any different. So in short, I think we should enter into some type of a partnership that's non-binding, a letter of intent. Let's look at our surplus lands and meet with the group. Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Plum and Councilor Brooks.
Yeah, so I just because we had the presentation today and we haven't really had time to really marinate as to what the things. I think there is a policy about not making decisions at the same meeting. I'll note that I'm aware of two other proponents of basically Tiny Village that have had some interaction with the city in the past that's not using public lands. So I think this would be good, as you mentioned, to leave it with staff at this time, and maybe we consider this at a future community of the whole. And I think there's a question as to the timing as well, as far as the election and what decisions we make, because it could be perceived as political opportunism, if you wish. So I wouldn't rush into a decision at this point.
Right. Can I comment, Councilor Brooks?
I would somewhat disagree in that we're not rushing into this. They sent a letter 6 or 8 months ago, and council's response was, well, we'll wait for the housing action plan to see. So this is, I know there is a policy regarding not making decisions based on a presentation. However, this is something that's dating back 6 or 8 months as well. So to me, I'd be inclined to make a motion for a letter of intent. It's a non-binding, I don't even know, agreement. It's not an agreement. It's a non-binding gesture, if you will, that does allow, in this case, the housing society to further try and get funding. And it's also a message to staff that council's interested in this. And so, obviously, I think it's important that staff look at this and try to find a piece of land that this would be the highest and best use. The city doesn't really own the land by the old elementary school, Mountain View Elementary, but I don't know if that's the highest and best use for that land. It's not very dense, but I don't think this is rushing into a decision. This is something that's been on the back burner for quite a long time.
Okay, Councillor Ryan.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's rushed, and I have no issue with moving forward as Councillor Brookhill just outlined.
All right, any other comments, Councillor Charlotte?
I agree with my fellow councillors that this is not a rushed process. We've been having conversation around housing and how we're going to support it. Showing a letter of intent or providing a letter of intent to support our local housing society that is a nonprofit organization. I don't think shortchanges any other organization that's trying to make a go of this, but again, does indicate to staff that council is supportive of this work. If it is a non-binding letter and then both the housing society can go out to find more partners, city staff have time to look at land and what the opportunities are, then the reports back would come to the next council after the election to then make a decision to go forward. It would not be on us to do that. We're just indicating the city's support for affordable and attainable home ownership, which I think is a really important missing piece. Whether it fixes the affordable home ownership issue or not, but it would contribute to that conversation. And I think in a very valid and healthy way.
All right, thank you for your comments, Councillor Brookshill. And then Councillor Elliott.
I will make a motion for the city to provide a letter of intent or a letter indicating land in principle. I'm not. To the Revelstoke Community Housing Society.
Okay, so second for that motion, Councillor Ryan. So discussion on the motion, Councillor Elliott, you had your hand up.
Just a question. The presentation that came to us earlier was for the tiny home. How does the Housing Society connected with that? Are they supporting it, or are they, because it's the Housing Society as is, don't sell homes. They don't sell ownership. They maintain ownership of the existing property that they have and rent out the space. So how maybe you've lost me on that one. How is the Housing Society getting involved with the tiny home project?
Well, so in the letter, it says the Revelstoke Community Housing Society is looking forward to an ongoing collaboration with the city of Revelstoke in the development of MicroHome Initiative. This project has significant community support with completion of the Housing Action Plan. So they're prepared to follow this momentum in the creation of affordable housing for residents of Revelstoke. But we still have Mr. Jockey in the chambers. I will put that question to him, Mr. Jockey.
So that is correct. The Revelstoke Community Housing Society has adopted the MicroHome Initiative as their own project. And I'm just helping to run the committee on that team.
And so Councillor Palmer, you have your hand up?
Yeah, so just for clarity then, actually, can we have the motion read back, please?
So Ms. Floyd, could you read the motion back, please?
Yes, Your Worship, that the city provide a letter of intent to support providing land in principle to the Revelstoke Community Housing Society.
Okay, so then the question that I have, or just for clarity, so we are asking the taxpayers to give their land for private ownership. And we're giving that land. I'm just making sure that that's clear, because the presentation was based on home ownership.
Right, yeah. And so Councillor Charlotte, comment?
It's not traditional market-based homeownership, though. This is perpetual affordable. So it's not going to rise, the cost of this home is not going to rise with the level of the market, which we have seen, as was stated in the presentation, double in our term. That won't happen with this. That's why I support the taxpayers supporting this with land. I appreciate hearing some of the opportunities to then over the long term recoup those costs back to the taxpayers that could then be used for other opportunities. So there's a little bit of give and take where we're providing to help make the math work, but it also gets locked in as that attainable home ownership for long term.
Councillor Palmer.
And Mayor Sulz, I recognize that my position or my concerns, I guess, are popular, especially at this, just before the election. Affordable housing crisis, the ability to do that. We just had the Housing Action Plan adopted. We haven't had a dialogue on how we go ahead. Now, based on which model is on here. There's going to be some 8, maybe 16, whatever number of people that are going to be in home ownership. So some, quite frankly, privileged people, because it's a small number of people that are going to benefit of having home ownership, regardless of what you talk about the model that's subsidized by the tax base. So I'm just making it clear, I am not in favor of this. The second thing is, we know of at least one other presentation, I'm not sure if it was this council or the previous council, of private enterprise wanting to do the very same thing on provincial land, not utilizing assets that belong to our tax base. So the idea, I love it, quite frankly, I love the idea. And so don't get me wrong on that, I love the idea, but I do see some problems moving ahead. And I think we're quite frankly making a decision that creates expectations that might get us into a little snag later on. So that's my concern.
Thank you for that comment. I have the same sorts of concerns as we move forward. We have that Bridge Creek land. We have some other lands in the community that are not necessarily fleshed out yet in my mind as to what ownership is. Some of it's in Columbia Park, some of it is on that Mountain View property. And I want to actually have staff look at it and say, what's the best outcome for this project? Where would this go? And I agree, Councillor, you're talking about, with all due respect, privilege, some people will be able to get houses, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I also want to make sure that what we do is going to be appropriate for the community as a whole as we move forward. So is this land best used for other projects for the community, and housing be placed somewhere else? And so I don't know whether voting in favor of this in principle will tie us to a piece of property. It ties us to a premise that we're going to support housing in general for the city. Now I'm going to go to Mr. Parliament for a comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, looking at the intent, I mean, you had your housing strategy released last week, 2 weeks ago now. In there talks a lot about affordability, both broad and narrow terms. When it comes to municipal owned land, it's been my practice to always explore any opportunity that aligns with your strategic plan, your affordability plan. And a letter of intent just does that because it's non-binding. At any time, the purchaser or the seller can opt out. You don't need a reason because it's non-binding. So when you explore through a letter of intent, you look at different options, you gather all the details, you look at the different models. And if either party has a problem meeting that, either party can opt out and there's no money exchange and it's just a letter of intent. It's a non-binding exercise. It's exploratory in nature. I have no problem with that. And I've done that before, but I really, encourage council to look at leveraging funds with BC Housing, especially in BC Housing, to Councillor Brooks Hill comment, does look for the municipality to either gift land or provide land, either leased land. There is ways to recoup those costs in order to give the capital funding. So the city of Revelstoke is going to have to find a way to leverage those BC Housing funds by looking at land. And I think the best tool, and non-binding, and recognizing you are entering an election, is through a letter of intent. There are no promises, and I think Adrian understands that. I just pulled out one that I signed 3 years ago, and it just says terms of condition. It's subject to the purchaser being approved for all financing. So in this case, it would be the Housing Society finding the capital costs through BC Housing to build these units, or some other financier. And it's up to the seller to accept those terms before they sign off. And at any time, either party can walk away. So the future council is not bound by this. The future council can say, you know what, we've looked at all the details and we've decided not to pursue this. But the letter of intent just shows that we're exploring options. And it's probably the easiest way rather than get into any other legal contract. Now, having said that, we could just table the whole thing. You know, we could just table it and wait till after the election and revisit it as to what, you know, Councillor Palmer's suggesting. But as the CAO, I certainly have no problem looking at a letter of intent and exploring different options before we do the final sign off through a contract and actual purchase.
Any comments from other councillors? Councillor Elliott, you have your hand up, and then Councillor Palmer.
Yes, I'm all in favor of supporting the Affordable Housing Society and as a nonprofit. The distinction here is the ownership versus who owns it. The society owns it in one case. In the proposed tiny home endeavor, it's the individuals, and so that's the stumbling block for me. But as Evan mentioned, it's just a letter of support. I'm in favor of that. Just say, let's explore the options in the future. But at least we're behind the affordable action on housing.
All right, Councillor Palmer, and then I'll make comment.
So I just need to have the motion read out again because I'm getting confused between letter and intent and support concepts.
Okay, Ms. Floyd, could you reread the motion, please?
Sure. That the city provide a letter of intent to support the provision of land in principle to the Revelstoke Community Housing Society.
So the word intent.
Yeah, so as that's written, I cannot support that because it is very intentional. It's it's a letter. It's not a letter of support, Councillor Elliott. It's a letter of intent. That's significant.
Should we change it to the letter of support?
I'm going to suggest, there's a controversy that's happening right here. I'm saying there is a controversy, and do we want to blow this up or not? I'm going to put a motion to table this to the next incoming council to see if it goes anywhere. If there's a second for the motion.
There's a second for the motion to table this. Councillor Elliott is seconding that motion to table it. So I will now call the question on tabling that. All in support of tabling this motion to new council. So we've got Councillor Elliott and Councillor Palmer is supporting that. So now we will go back to the original motion. You
need to call a question on the table.
Oh, sorry. My apologies. Thanks. All those in favor of tabling the motion? So we got Councillor Elliott, Councillor Palmer. So let's go back to the original motion, and I'm going to ask Ms. Floyd to read that one last time, and I'm going to ask for clarification.
Sure, Your Worship. That the city provide a letter of intent to support the provision of land in principle to the Revelstoke Community Housing Society.
And so that word intent basically means that we are intending to support. Is that correct? Mr. Parliament, comments?
May I just
go ahead.
Point of order?
No, sorry.
So we got the tabling motion. There's two of us, asking who's supportive. You didn't call the question as to who's opposed.
My apologies.
Right.
So
yes.
Who is opposed to tabling the motion?
Okay. So that's defeated.
Right. Now we'll go back. Thank you. Mr. Palmer.
I would suggest respectfully that the motion be amended, just enter into a letter of intent with the Housing Society and take out the verbiage when it talks about supporting in principle of land. Take that out. That's more second, third base. We just want to get to first base, which is, the city of Revelstoke's interested in entering into a letter of intent to explore options vis-a-vis the microhome concept, and that's it.
Yeah.
Who made the Council Palmer?
So I'll put the motion to amend the motion as the CEO mentioned, except for changing the word intent to support.
Okay.
All
right. Is there a seconder, Councillor Elliott? Are you seconding that amendment?
Seconding the amendment.
Okay. So Ms. Floyd, could you read the amended motion, please?
Sorry, Your Worship, you'd like the amendment read or the motion as amended?
The motion as amended, pardon me.
So that the city provide a letter of support to the Revelstoke Community Housing Society to explore opportunities with respect to the MicroHome Initiative.
Okay, was that the intent, Councillor Palmer?
That's be the intent of my
Okay.
motion.
Mr. Parliament, you're okay with that?
Concurred.
Okay, so I will call the question on the amended motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councillor Brooks Hill is opposed, balance of council is in favor. All right, this motion as amended has been passed.
No, you've got to call the original question.
Okay. I think I know this by now, right?
Yeah, it's all good.
So going back to the motion on the table, which is now amended. All those in favor? Opposed? No, Councillor Ryan is opposed. Balance of,
No.
You're in favor, Councillor Ryan?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Councillor Brooks, are you in favor?
I'm in favor.
Okay, it's unanimous. Everyone's in favor. Thank you. All right, we got through that. Appreciate that. Thank you. All right, moving on to 13A, Finance Committee meeting minutes of August 17th. Any comments? That was basically the discussion on what we just passed regarding the grant and aid applications. Do we have any questions from the press, Ms. Floyd?
Worship.
None? Okay, thank you. I would like to make a motion to move in camera pursuant to section 91A, C, D, G, and K of the Community Charter. Moved by Councillor Palmer, seconded by Councillor Shalet. All in favor? Motion carried. We'll